To order, will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Could have a brief moment of silence in recognition of veterans and those who have passed. In particular, we have two condolence letters this evening. A special condolence goes out to the family of George Capp upon his passing on January 9th, 2020. Mr. Capp served in Company A, 117th Infantry Regiment, 30th Infantry Division, V Corps, 9th Army, United States Army during World War II. Also, condolences go out to the family of George P. Pilati upon his passing. Mr. Pilati served the United States Army Air Corps during World War II. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our Town Council meeting, January 21st, 2020. Just want to remind everybody here that this meeting is being televised live on cable, so even though you don't see any cameras, they are here. I'll entertain a motion to approve our minutes from our previous meeting.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are passed. Announcements from the president. Just two announcements this evening is to what I said 2 weeks ago, that there is a vacancy in the District 6 council seat through a resignation. There's still 1 week left. If any qualified person within the district would like to seek the appointment to the position until the next election, there's still 1 more week to submit your name. We do have already 2 names that have been submitted, and we will discuss that at our meeting in 2 weeks. The other announcement I have is due to the resignation of Councilor Wood, that opened up a seat on the Budget and Finance Committee and the Rules and Procedures Committee, and I have appointed Councilor Columbotus to Rules and Procedures and Councilor Sean George to the Budget and Finance Committee. They will be receiving letters soon of that appointments. We do not have any proclamations this evening. It's now time for Citizens Open Forum. Are there any citizens here that wish to speak during the Citizens Open Forum portion of our meeting? Anybody here wishes to speak during the Citizens Open Forum portion of our meeting? Seeing none, we have one appointment this evening. Oh my, I apologize already for the name. I should have looked at that sooner and got out my dictionary, but Juliam Dugados. Do I got it? Dugados?
Guillaume.
Did I get it wrong? Okay. But it right. Appointment to the Board of Health. I'll refer to the town manager.
Mr. President, Mr. Delgados has applied to be one of the 3 members of the Board of Health. He's been in Bridgewater for a little less than 10 years, about 8 years, 9 years, and has been active in the Community Emergency Response Team, the CERT team, and earlier this year became a U.S. citizen after being in this country working as a French citizen. So happy to bring him aboard. I think he brings a good viewpoint to the Board of Health and has a particular interest in environmental issues, illegal dumping, clean air, and clean water. But I would encourage your ratification on his application.
Motion to appoint.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second to appoint. Any discussion? Mr. Columbotus?
I can't help but notice the comments from the Bridgewater Citizens Advisory Committee who recommended this candidate. And under the section of asking for additional comments from the committee, They state, "The committee recommends that the town manager meet with this candidate before moving forward with an appointment," because apparently they have some concern over this candidate's, what they call an adamant stand against vaccinations. So I'm wondering if, I guess to the town manager, is that, what do you suggest?
I met with him at some length, and we discussed a variety of different things. And I guess my position would be, while I may have some personal disagreements with his stand on things, I think he brings a different viewpoint to the Board of Health that is sometimes valuable. And quite honestly, their purview really is outside of, the issues that he has some pretty adamant concerns. I will give him kudos. I mean, he's brought those concerns, with him to the Citizen Advisory Committee and was very upfront and honest about them. So I have no particular issue with his personal viewpoints on some issues.
I would just like to say that I've seen he's been quite active on the Bridgewater Residents Facebook page, and he does appear to be quite thoughtful and well-reasoned, and so I personally will be supporting this appointment.
Any other discussion or concerns? This requires a voice vote. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Congratulations, and thank you for your interest in the Board of Health. We do not have any hearings this evening. We do not have any licensed transactions. We do have 2 presentations tonight. First is the Community Preservation Committee update. I'd like to recognize the town manager for this, to introduce our speaker for our 10-minute presentation.
Mr. President, Vice Chair of the Community Preservation Committee, Dr. Carlton Hunt, is here to give you a little update on what the CPC does and some of the projects that it has invested in over the years, and very generally how the financing works.
Oh, good. You have it up there. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And now I choke. I'm here in the stead of the chair of the Community Preservation Committee, Gina Gasconi. She couldn't make it. She does send her regards. I really appreciate this process that you've entered into of having committees. I've asked for that for a long time, and as you will see in something that there are a number of, in the admin code places, they shall present annually. So this is a great opportunity. I'm going to cover 5 topics tonight, roughly. Maybe a couple others that I didn't capture quite right. But I'm going to do a little bit of history on the CPC and the CPA, only because some of you have not been engaged in this all that long that I know of. I'm going to talk a little bit about the charge and some definitions. There's some definition updates that I think are important. I'm going to talk a little bit about some current activities, some historical activities, some current activities. I'm going to give you some good fiscal news, or the town some good fiscal news, and then a little bit on the 5-year CP committee's 5-year plan update that we're planning to hold a public hearing, I think, in February 22nd for that community preservation plan update. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'll probably look at the projector because I can see better than right here. An aging issue. My eyes are bad and they get worse. So in 2005, the town voted to become a Community Preservation Act committee. The first year of revenue generation, we saw $352,000 come into the coffers. Jumping through the next 14 years, we have revenue stream of about $9.3 million through 3 areas, and there's a couple of smaller ones I didn't include. Town revenue, that's the 1%, 2%, I'm going to call it tax, but adder to the town property assessments over $100,000. So the first $100,000 is in fact not included in that calculation. The State Trust Fund match, that's the trust fund that was set up by the Community Preservation Act. It was generated about $2.4 million. Town revenue is about $6.7 million. There's an earnings on investment because we do carry quite a bit of money in the bank, and why not put it to work? It's about $168,000. To date, we have expended or committed. There are several projects that have commitments, but they're not, it's a long process to get the money completely down. So we commit it so we don't have to deal with it when we think about projects. About $6.8 million have been expended in the community. There's a number of projects that have been recommended by the CPC to the town council, who has the final say. And you can go on to the community preservation website and look at their data bank of projects, and there's a very complete listing of all projects, those that have been completed, those that were suspended, those that were withdrawn, and some of the money that's involved with each project. Some example projects we thought, Gina and I thought would be really important to remind people: various feasibility studies to include studies about getting this building restored, the town hall restored, some memorial building, and a number of other things. The town hall external restoration that we funded some years ago, the academy building restoration with another set of monies from the town to make it complete, the Mount Prospect Cemetery fence restoration. You'll recall the fence was taken down during World War II for iron, and that entity came to us and asked if they could restore that fence. It was a very dilapidated, not very becoming fence. So the fence that's there is CPA funded. We did do the historic town records finding, so they're all in a nice big books downstairs in the town clerk's office or vault. The McElwain School historic designation, which we funded and helped move that project forward. The memorial building ceiling restoration and some interior work, some exterior work was funded by CPA. Keith Homestead in terms of conservation, the Marine Needs Farm in terms of conservation rights, the McElwain School redevelopment project. Those funds have been appropriated, but they're not yet officially on the books, and for a variety of reasons. We also funded some recreational activities, girls softball fields, the recreational needs assessment, and the Legion Field lighting upgrades. So the committee in the town has been active, and the town has benefited greatly. I did include an attachment because I had it handout. If you don't have it, it's got an attachment that lists all the projects, but you can go to that website and look at them also. Next page, please. So the current committee consists of 8 people. Harry Bailey from Concom, Jean Garino from Planning Board, Gina Gasconi from Parks and Rec, myself at large, Kevin Mandeville, Open Space, Joan Newmeister, Housing Authority, Steve Rogan, Historic Commission, and William Smith, Bill Smith, who's with the Historic District Commission. There is one open seat, that's the Affordable Housing Trust, and I trust that it will have full complements soon and be charged, etc. Next, please. It's kind of slow going down. I didn't put it in PowerPoint, and I wrote it large because I can't see, as I said before. So this is a CP charge. I'm not going to read it all, but it's from the admin code, and the key words are shall, may, could. So the things we do, critical things in terms of shall, we make the recommendations to you, the town council, for acquisition, creation, preservation of open space, and there's a whole bunch of other things that go into detail, but it's all under Mass General Law C-44B. And then annually, the committee meet with the finance director and the town manager and shall make a budget recommendation to the town manager for inclusion in the town budget. I'd like to see that process probably improved a little bit because we need to get the information from the finance committee director. Then we need to make a recommendation to the town manager so you have an official trail. It needs to be more official, I believe. What we may do is include a recommendation to set aside for later spending funds for specific purposes when not enough revenue is in our coffers. We can also recommend funds to be borrowed and repaid with community preservation funds to accomplish community preservation objectives vis-a-vis the academy building was bonded. We shall use local and regional open space plans, and I highlight here, I should, regional housing plans and the master plan as a guide when considering recommendations. Sorry, I should have brought a bowl of water. I can't talk and chew at the same time. Eat gum either. So another thing that the committee shall do is annually study the needs and responsibilities and resources of the town regarding community preservation. So we are charged with looking at the needs on an annual basis. I think one of the things, since I'm fairly new to the committee, I'm going to recommend is that we annually hold, and I think we're supposed to hold a meeting with the public to study needs. But I think what we really need to do is get together with all the multi-member bodies and really talk about what Parks and Rec needs, what does historic preservation need, what does open space need, and the planning board, what are they looking at? And so that we have input from both citizens and the constituted multi-member bodies. And we're supposed to hear, and this is where it actually is going to try to happen, hold one or more public informational meetings on the needs, possibilities, and resources of the town regarding community preservation possibilities and resources. That needs to be an annual thing so that we're not necessarily surprised by anything coming in. We don't mind surprises, but it's better to know in advance so we can advise people. Next, please. So we support anything that's CP eligible, and it comes from existing organizations. And again, there's Housing Partnership, Building Housing Authority, Bridgewater Affordable Housing Trust, Historic Preservation. We reach out to Historic Commission, District Commission, Old Bridgewater Historic Society, which actually is a keeper of lots of historic documents for Old Bridgewater, the original 7x7 off a point of center town. In open space, conservation, and rec organizations, there's a whole list: Ag Commission, Conservation, Recreation. So those are all the committees that we need to bring into the fold a little bit more in order to completely reach out to the needs in advance. So to go into the activities, I went back to calendar year 18 and 19. We have money that we have, and you all have recommended, or we've recommended, you have approved $20,000 from Bridgewater. West Bridgewater also approved $20,000. We're doing a collections. I'm a member of that, so by disclosure, we're doing a collections assessment. It's been completed, and we are doing a building assessment, and the consultant's been a little slower than we would like. The report is due next month, and that will look at what we can do to do better preservation. Do we need to do anything with the Keith House that the society owns in order to restore it, make sure it doesn't fall down, quite frankly. In 2019, thank you all, the Broad Street property purchase for accessibility, for an accessibility entrance to Stiles and Hart Park was funded. Good news there was the town worked hard to get a grant back, so we basically paid a third of the cost, something like a third of the cost out of community preservation funds. Some things are pending. The Housing Trust recommendation to the McElwain School. I noticed that at the FinCom meetings, it's always carried as an item in old business, and I don't know why that is that way. But anyway, I don't think it's really been fully transferred over to the Housing Trust yet. But they have been appropriated, so we know the money's not available to us going down the road. 2020 projects that are under review, Central Square Congregational Church restoration. They came in with a proposal in December. We are meeting tomorrow night. We will have some comments back on that. They're looking for their upcoming 200th anniversary. One of the oldest churches in town. The building has burned a couple times, but the current one is definitely historic. And we will be looking very carefully at what they've submitted. And that review starts tomorrow. Our community preservation consultant will be giving us input as to what they think are the good parts, the bad parts, the can't do parts, that kind of thing. The Memorial Library building, access and internal modifications, town manager has submitted it and it's being returned. It has been returned to the town manager for revision. We have a number of questions. The Legion, the Parks and Rec Department yesterday submitted a proposal for Legion Field fencing. Basically, I understand from the proposal that a storm blew down all of the dugouts and that kind of thing out at Legion Field so that players don't have a place to sit and that kind of thing. And insurance paid for replacement of those dugouts. But they don't have fencing for safety from the kids if somebody hits a foul ball, which I always did, and it went the wrong way. We have to protect the kids from that.
You were a lot better than me. I missed all the time.
Thank you. And there's backstops, and there's some hazardous fencing replacement. And what I call our first reading is going to be tomorrow night, and I don't know where that will take. It's not a huge amount of money, but it is recreationally related. There's some potential projects that I've heard bantered around. The Town River Landing. I found and submitted borings plans to the town manager for potential bridge footings. Plan was completed in 2008. I've given it to the town manager. We haven't seen anything from the town engineer in terms of the feasibility of putting a footbridge out there based on those borings. We don't have the final report from the two projects that were funded either. We're missing those. We can't find them. The World War I Memorial Project depends a lot in terms of what's going to happen with Central Square and its revitalization and that kind of thing. And we're going to need a more formal plan and cost and budget, detailed budget, that kind of thing. So those are things that have just been done on the horizon. So the good news. The legislature passed last year a new funding formula for the CPA Trust Fund. They went from documents being filed to being $20 per filing to $50. This is now legislation passed and in place. So they went from $20 requirement to a $50 requirement, and the lien certificates went from $10 to $25. So you slide it down just a little bit more, Michael. So the current, under the last year's formation, was about $24 million that was being generated. These new fees are expected to add $36 million to that trust fund per year, just because of the fees. So the expectation going forward by 2021 is that the state trust will have $60 million to provide to towns to support preservation, or et cetera. And I'm just very quickly on this, the timetable was given to us by the coalition, but the first distribution, the new fees begin as of the first of this year. By November 15th, 2020, the first distribution of that money with the new fees will occur, but only in 10 months of revenue. So the first year that the full annual cycle of distribution will occur, it's in November 15th, 2021. So the good news is there's more money. It will grow over the next couple of years. So the anticipated increase for Bridgewater, this is from the Community Preservation Coalition, it's anticipated that the state match by 2021 will increase from about 14% to 33% of local revenue. That's almost a tripling, or 2.5 times. I think we can conservatively expect at least 20 to 25% increasing for budgeting purposes. That's because that fee schedule is one thing, but you never want to go to the max when you budget because you never know what the economy is going to do and if we have a housing downturn, that kind of thing. Tomorrow night, we're going to clarify the budgeting percent because we need to carry that forward in our 5-year plan. Right now, we're carrying 14%, and some of us think that it should be a little bit higher given the new state fee structure. Just to give you a sense in terms of not percentages, of real dollars, if you look at the bottom line, this is projected. The 2018 CPA trust fund transfer to Bridgewater was $85,000, 13.8%. Expected distribution by 2021 is about $200,000, or 33%. So we expect to see something closer to the $200,000 per year, 150 to $200,000 a year from the state if our revenue stream stays the same, and it should. So that's the good news. The 5-year MGL required 5-year CPA plan update has been in progress for about a year. J.M. Goldson LLC was contracted to update that plan. That organization has provided many public events, conducted surveys, we've done CPC deliberations, We've reviewed the draft plan 2 or 3 times. The final review will be tomorrow night. And at that point, I expect that we will vote on holding a public hearing. I believe it will be February 26th. Don't hold me to that date, but that's the projection because that's our next scheduled meeting, and we're trying to combine the meeting with the public hearing. The focus areas in the 5-year draft plan will be as in the past, but community housing will take a major step forward. As you know, Massachusetts and other places in the country, almost everywhere, has great struggles with housing and affordability. And one of the things that I think is important to understand is not just acquire, create, and preserve, is to support community housing. And it's for households with incomes at or below 100% of the area median income. It's a little bit different than 40B, okay? That's 80%. So I think supporting community housing can take many different pathways forward, and we're hoping that we can see some more in that area. Historic preservation, acquire, preserve, rehabilitate, and restore historic resources. Rehabilitate is a word that came into to the CPA legislation 4 or 5 years ago. It used to be acquire, preserve, and restore. Well, now it's rehabilitate. So it's a nuance on restore. But there are some conditions that are listed on the state register, or importantly, or determined by the locally significant by the Historical Commission. So the Historical Commission has to say something's historically relevant in order to actually come before us for funding. Recreation, acquire, create, preserve, rehabilitate, and restore land for recreational use. I'm going to clarify a little bit more about what that rehabilitation means in a few minutes. Terms added or clarified under Mass General Law in the past few years. Active recreation, there's a clear definition of active recreation. There's a clear definition of passive recreation, which a lot of people in town are very involved with. That involves walkways, street, paving of paths, that kind of thing. Rehabilitation, basically it's capital improvements or extraordinary repairs to historic resources, open spaces, lands for recreational use, and community housing for the purposes of making the above functional for their intended uses. In terms of rehab, it has to be compliant with ADA requirements at the federal and state level and local. So to go in with historic resources, what they're saying is rehabilitation for historic resources must comply with the standards of rehabilitation stated by the United States Secretary of the Interior Standards. With recreational use, rehabilitation includes the replacement of playground equipment, other capital improvements to the land or facilities which make the related land and facilities more functional for the intended recreational use. I think that's a really significant, better definition than we would fight over in the past. The other thing that they've included here is called natural resources. And that is any and all naturally occurring materials, substances, or land within a community, watershed, or region. Ocean, shellfish, inland, wild birds, wild mammals, game, the whole ecosystem basically is something that's considered in terms of natural resources. It also includes public shade and ornamental trees and shrubs. That could be important if we have a lot of trees blown down in a strong wind that are public trees. So soil, it goes on and on. The Bridgewater CPA, this is a detailed piece that goes all the way back to 2006, and this is in the plan. It will be updated tomorrow night, but it looks from 2020 to 2024, the 5-year effort, is what we expect. In blue is the light blue is what we expect to receive from our town revenue. The $85,000 in the gray, that's what is the 13% or 14%, and that's the number I think we need to come up with a more realistic yet conservative number. And the other things include interest and some grants and that kind of thing. So in the handout that I don't know if you have, but I have a handout, you can actually study that a little bit and see how it's been over the years. I'm almost at the end. I don't know if I'm up to 12 minutes yet. Okay, here. Estimated CPA funds available for appropriation in fiscal year 20. FY9 available was $2.3 million. We have an estimated collections that could go up a little bit because of the new fees of $700,000. We've already accounted for the Keith Homestead annual money and also the administrative costs. So the FY20 estimated available funds, this is draft, is about 2.5 million that would become available in 2020 by November. Our reserve balances as of October 10th, and these again will change because the state hadn't finalized the amount of money that was going to come to the states, to the towns and cities. But you can see that the total amount of reserve funding balance is about 3.7 million. So we're not flush, but we're also not on the pauper side in terms of funds. So past and anticipated funding will be updated tomorrow. I've said that 3 times. We are holding the public information hearing in February. The other thing that this plan is doing is contributing substantially and significantly to the comprehensive master plan that's currently under development. All 3 of the areas we deal with are sections in that comprehensive master plan. So this research that was done here will transfer over quite nicely to that plan. I have included in here the administrative code in the handout that I gave. We don't need to go through it. And I also included that web spreadsheet that the state carries in terms of all our projects, but it didn't print very nicely. So I have, if you want to ask me questions, I'll do my best to answer or punt.
Thank you very much. Any councilors have any questions for Mr. Hunt? Mr. Rushton.
First of all, thank you very much for the presentation. It was excellent, and thank you for all of the work that's been done over the last several years. I've been involved in some of the projects in the Rec Commission, and they've benefited the children in the town tremendously. I just had a quick question for you in terms of process. As I sit here and listen to this project, sort of a little pet peeve project that's come up of mine is having discussions with people about Jenny Leonard Park.
Okay, I'll do my
And
best.
so I just wanted you to, for the public's own knowledge, if you saw something like Jenny Leonard Park and had an interest in that, in getting the CPC involved, what is the avenue? Should we be going to the Rec Commission to sort of inspire them to do something, or would they be coming before the CPC with an idea like Jenny Leonard and rehabilitation of that park, considering all of the homes that have been built out there? What is the process?
I'll try to do my best to describe it. I've only, like I said, I've been about 6 months into it, and I've only experienced 3 projects. But I do have some experience with the early process when it was developed. And thank you for your compliments. We really appreciate that. I think it needs to, some of the committees that you mentioned could come to the CPC and talk with us at one of our open meetings, or send a representative. You could say, we have this idea we want to do. What do you think? The critical part is the upfront work before you develop an application. I think you need to work with the town manager, since all town-derived projects need to come through him. So I would say, figure out what you might want to do with some of the Rec Commission, the Parks and Rec. If you want to do that, put together some thinking on it, maybe some budgeting cost type things, maybe some concepts for design. Come and meet with us, and then go back after we have a discussion and develop a full-blown application. It's very detailed. It's easy to do, but it's detailed. And it requires, one of the things that I'm finding that submissions are lacking is budget detail. There's some stuff that you need. If you have 4 tasks you're going to do, or 4 sub-projects you're going to do, we need to have the budget on each one of those so we can actually ascertain its relevance to the CPC. We could get an application that could ask for something that's really maintenance. We can't fund maintenance, but we can fund restoration and rehabilitation. You have to watch out for the words a little bit, but the committee makes that decision. So, concept, talk to the committee, develop an application, work it through with the town manager, submit it to us. And then we will take a read and then have comments, etc., come back with questions, whatever. And then we go forward from there, whether it's up or down or partial.
Okay.
And that goes then to the towns, from us to the town council. Town council looks at it, and town council can only accept the price of it, reduce it, and there's one other one, or say no. So the town council cannot increase the Community Preservation Committee's recommendation. You can only keep it the same, reduce it, or make it 0.
So in terms of this particular park, the best place to go would be to the Rec Commission.
I would assume, I assume so, but I'm not the expert, but I think it would be Recs and Park, since it's a park, whatever the park side of Rec.
Okay. And I know you mentioned you personally have just been on a short time, but in terms of CPC money with the Housing Authority, I know you mentioned ADA compliance. Some of our housing was built in the 60s and the 1980s and lacks ADA compliance. Has there been applications that you're aware of and what the relationship is with the Housing Authority with CPC funds?
To my knowledge, and looking at that list, I don't believe there has been that type of applications for the Housing Authority.
Okay.
That, the Memorial Building, Library Building, is actually an ADA accessibility
Issue?
application,
Okay.
plus other parts, but there's a very nice, there is a plan for doing the front and making that more accessible.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. I
Thank you for
appreciate
your
it.
questions.
Any other questions for Mr. Hunt? Again, thank you very much for coming in for that presentation. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. It's a great thing to be doing.
For our next 10-minute presentation, I will refer to the town manager for our introduction.
Mr. President, Jennifer Burke, our Community and Economic Development Director, is here, and she just wanted to outline for you and also for the folks watching what the process forward is, the legislative process for the zoning recodification that we've been working on for well over a year now. So,
Thank you. Good evening. Again, I'm Jennifer Burke. I'm your Director of Community and Economic Development. Thank you for having me here this evening, and I promise I won't be more than 10 minutes. I'll probably be a lot less than 10 minutes. I don't have a fancy presentation, so I'm going to do mostly just speak to you. We started this process about almost 2 years ago now, doing a full recodification, rewrite, and reconfiguration of our zoning ordinances, or zoning bylaws as they're called now. That is, we're cleaning it up, we're making it more consistent with state law, we're reorganizing it, we're making it a more structured, readable document that's usable for the public. It's more public friendly, it's more friendly for staff here in town. So that's the process we've been going through. The town hired attorney Mark Bobrowski as a consultant to work with us on this project. And the town manager, Michael Dutton, created a committee of staff, and it also included Councilor Colin Botus, Patrick Driscoll, who's our planning board chair, Zu Antoniro, our town engineer, Steve Solari, our building official, and myself. We all met with Mark several times. We started in August of 2018, and we met, I think, about over 11 to 12 meetings with him over the course of a year and a half, working on several drafts and getting, different versions, going over different sections and getting it reorganized. The draft that is presented for first reading by Councilor Colin Botus and Councilor Loesch tonight is actually draft number 10. So it's been through many iterations. In November, we had a board and committee workshop with the Planning Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the CEDC. And Mr. Attorney Bobrowski came and presented that draft at the time, I think was draft 7, and presented his findings, presented what we did, and took comments and feedback from the boards and committees and the people that were in the audience at the time. And then in December, we had a public workshop where we did a similar presentation with Attorney Bobrowski, and we had about 10 to 12 residents in the audience. I was surprised. That was a good turnout from my perspective. We've posted it on our website, the multiple drafts. We've had it on Facebook, so there has been interaction. There's been public support and outpouring. I've had email correspondence with several people in the community over this project. So I'm just giving you this history because I don't want you to think that this was done sort of in a vacuum. Like, this has been a pretty open process. So that's where we are to this date. As I stated, Councilor Colin Botus and Councilor Loesch are co-sponsoring an ordinance later on this evening for first reading in front of you for draft number 10 as our final draft to put forward. What we would anticipate, because this is a very global process and we would want as much public outreach and input as possible, that normally when you do zoning, you refer it to the planning board and the CEDC for a joint hearing. We were sort of anticipating that maybe in this instance, we would recommend that you refer it directly to the planning board for their own hearing, and they would have a hearing, and then it would come back to the full council for a hearing. I think it's such an important piece of work that we've been working on for a long time in this community, and it means so much to everybody else that it's critical that the full council gets to hear the public input and hold the hearing. Clearly, that's your decision to make, but that would be my recommendation. That being said, that doesn't mean you can't refer it to the CEDC for review and comment, to provide comment back to the rest of the councilors. Obviously, you're all more than welcome to come to a planning board meeting or hearing when they hold it. Right now, if it gets referred tonight, the goal is to hold a planning board hearing in middle of February, and then go from there. So that's where we're at. I don't really have anything else unless you have any questions for me. I just wanted to give you sort of the history of the process and the process going forward.
Does anybody have any questions for Ms. Burke? Mr. Columbotus?
Thank you, Ms. Burke, for coming. Can you perhaps just clarify for everyone what the role of this is just
Sure.
one part of a two-part process of kind
Sure.
of overarching review of our zoning. And this is, there's really not, well, go ahead and explain the difference of this part of the process versus the other parallel process that's going on.
Right. So yes, so there is a parallel process. So this part is the zoning recodification and reorganization, like I indicated. There is also the comprehensive master plan update process that Dr. Hunt had referred to in his presentation. That process is also going on concurrently. We're expected to be wrapping up that process sometime into late June of this year. Through that process, we anticipate there will be some recommendations for implementation of zoning changes, policy decisions regarding zoning, and we would anticipate there would be additional changes to zoning. So that this iteration of the zoning has a few changes in it, but nothing substantial as far as policy, nothing substantial as far as, none of the map is changing, none of the districts are changing, none of that is changing. Those kinds of conversations are happening through the master plan process, and those will come later on this calendar year, we would hope, or they would start to happen. Other things that we're starting to look at are the sign ordinance. We're starting to look at possibly wind energy. I mean, there's other things that aren't in your zoning now that we're starting to look at as well. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I consider zoning a living, breathing document. I think it should always be continuously looked at and updated. State law changes constantly. The community's needs change all the time. So I'm looking at this as getting our document right and getting it in a place where we can go further, and then every year take a look at it and say, okay, what didn't we like this year? Or what do we need to change? Or what did somebody want to come and bring a business to town that we couldn't do because we didn't have the right zoning? So those are the kinds of things that we can do going forward once we have the right roadmap, and that's what this is.
Just one more thing. So this, our zoning code was kind of amended, year after year to the point where we ended up with this document that was not necessarily internally consistent.
Correct.
The structure was kind of disjointed. And
Yeah.
so Mr. Bobrowski is really kind of the expert on sort of
Sure.
creating a rational zoning code that's, easy to, it's approachable by, people who want it, developers or citizens, and it just provides a better framework really for
Yes.
what will be more substantive changes through the
Right.
comprehensive
For
planning
those of you who
process.
don't, not to interrupt you, but for those who
Yeah.
don't know, Attorney Bobrowski is a well-renowned, world-renowned land use attorney. He has written the book on land use law, and I think it's in its 14th edition or something. And we were very fortunate to get him. He's done this in many communities in Massachusetts, and he's really well respected. So we were fortunate to get him, as our consultant, and he's been great to work with. So he will be present at the hearing with the planning board, and he will be present at the hearing if you choose to have one as well, and be able to present to you as well. So that's where we're going.
Any other questions? Thank you very much
Thank you so
for the
much.
time. Yep. Moving on to the town manager's report, there's quite a few items under here. Hopefully, they'll move along fairly quickly. I'll just refer to the town manager.
10 minutes. So I do have a number of items on my report. The Mitchell School, which is a standing item, I do know that the Highway Department, our Highway Roadways Department is working with the engineers to try to get soil borings done this week, on-site soil borings done this week. That's part of the process to determine what's subsurface prior to the complete design of the building. I know that our police and fire departments have met with the security consultants and the architects to review the tentative plans. They've made some suggested improvements, mostly the sight lines and other safety items, which probably aren't appropriate to mention in this setting. Also, the architects and the OPM have met with the group of teachers and staff to review the interior education spaces and also the exterior landscape elements, which will be part of the educational experience for the kids pre-K through 2. On a good note, they've also been reviewing the life expectancy of the materials used for a lot of these exterior elements especially, and also the maintenance requirements. So there's certainly some attentive eyes looking to make sure that, we use materials that are going to be long-lasting and that we know exactly what the maintenance requirements are and that we're capable of maintaining what we actually build. In terms of schedule, design development is projected to last through March of this year. The 60% construction drawings are on target for June of 2020, June of this year. There is a submission at that point to the MSBA, and after that, we move to 90% construction documents in August. Another submission at the end of August to the MSBA, and then 100% construction documents finalized by the end of October of this year. So we expect, assuming no changes in that schedule, we expect a bidding process in November of 2020 and construction to begin in December of 2020 and last through July of 2022. So that has been roughly the schedule. There haven't been any major changes to that, but that's generally what the timeline looks like. Realize it's very early in the process, but we're still on budget. The total budget is, I say we're early in the process, we're early in the construction phase. The process has been going on for a couple of years now, so or since 2015. Total budget for this project is $80,600,000. $46,771,000 is to be paid by the residents. About almost $34 million is to be paid by the Commonwealth through the MSBA as a reimbursement. Stated reimbursement rate for the project is 55.63%. That's our sort of formulaic reimbursement rate. That gets knocked down some because of the ineligible costs associated with the project. So we have an effective reimbursement rate of almost 42%. So that is all in keeping with what we've been told and what we've seen thus far. I can tell you that Tony Solmonti, our finance director, and I met with the district and the district's financial advisor kind of to make sure that we map out the cash flows. 80 million, 81 million is not nothing. Certainly we want to be attentive to the cash flow needs of the project. We also talked a little bit about the bonding scenarios. And we're looking at some creative options there to try to reduce the transactional costs as well as the overall interest costs on the project. So that is good news. Just for anybody who's interested in attending, excuse me, the building committee meetings are generally held on the second and fourth Mondays of the month, right here in the council chambers. The next one is the 27th, January 27th. And the architects are going to be providing what's referred to as a fly-through. My assumption is that that's sort of a visual of the interior, exterior of the building design as they've designed it thus far. They're also going to talk a little bit more about the site plan for the play areas, parking and traffic, and utilities and stormwater management. So that's generally the Mitchell School. So if anybody has questions about that.
Mr. Fitzgibbon?
And just to be clear, you outlined a whole series of submissions to the state. Those are essentially the next time we're able to do each of those things, that we can't get there any sooner for 60% than June, and 90% for August, and 100% for October. And we're on track to meet those deadlines, and it's still, for lack of a better term, being as fast-tracked as possibly can be.
Correct. There's a pretty specific timeline the MSBA sets out, and for a variety of reasons, but just to make sure that the project is done properly. But you're correct; those submission dates are fairly fixed. Correct.
Anybody else? Questions regarding this school?
The description of this fly-through sounds pretty intriguing. So is it kind of you think like an animated
That's my own
takeoff
tease.
from the CAD drawings? Yeah.
That's my own tease. I'm trying to get people to go to the meeting.
Right. Well, I imagine citizens would be quite interested to see this, and I'm wondering if it'd be possible to make these documents available. Will the building committee be maintaining a website where these documents could be parked for public viewing? Is that something that's kind of
Bridgewater School. BridgewaterSchoolProject.com. BridgewaterSchoolProject.com does house all of the documents that the committee reviews. So whatever the meeting presentation is, it'll be posted right there.
great? Thanks.
Good.
Okay, next.
All right, Skip's Liquors. I do want to give a brief update and clarify something about the general liquor license renewal process, and I apologize if I was unclear. Generally, Chapter 138, which is liquor, Section 16A provides licensees with what has been referred to as sort of a prima facie right to renew their license every December, subject to certain very specific conditions, more specifically safety inspections. So the holder of an annual license under, in this case, under Section 15, which is a liquor store, who applies for a renewal is prima facie entitled to one. However, any application may be rejected for cause, and in this case, we did a non-renewal because he could not provide the public safety inspections that are required by the ABCC, and he has the right to appeal that. So, licensee whose application for renewal has been denied by the local licensing authority, by the council in this case, is deemed to have been granted such license until the period for such appeal has expired or until the period has been dismissed entirely. So, in the case of Skip's, that non-renewal was appealed, and with the grant of license at the last meeting, that appeal is effectively withdrawn. However, when the council, if you recall, when the council approved the license, it was based on my assertion that we would not deliver that physical license until all the required inspections had been done. And that is critical leverage, and it's important because Skip's has to have that physical license before they can actually go and order liquor. So they're allowed, the ABCC allows them to stay open during the cycle of an appeal, but without the physical license, they cannot actually order their product. So he has complied with everything up to now. He has one safety inspection left to complete, and once that is completed, once the work is done to complete that inspection, we will deliver that license. One of the things I think that got muddied a little bit, certainly in my mind, was the building, the license, the liquor license versus the building inspection. They're really two different issues, and so we try to make sure we treat them as two different issues. Certainly in terms of the liquor licensing, But in terms of the building office is awaiting an update on some minor plumbing work, and as soon as that's completed, then he'll be entitled to his final inspection. And they don't foresee any major issue there. So I don't know if that muddies Skip's anymore or makes it clearer, but I do, there was a lot of confusion about what was required in the site plan in terms of the building, not as liquor, but in terms of the building, what was required in the site plan and what ended up getting built. What ended up getting built is pursuant to the approved site plan. In between those two things, he came in, he paved a portion of the property that he wasn't supposed to pave. He's since torn that up. He claimed he had installed drainage, which had not been installed, which is fine because there was no required drainage on the original site plan. So that provided a little bit of confusion, but I guess best to say that what was approved by the planning board several years ago is what was built and what exists today. And in terms of compliance, he complies. Everything in between was, a bit of a mess, but he is in compliance. So I'm happy to.
Any questions? Go ahead, Mr. Columbotus.
I'd like to address that little bit of a mess, and that is, so originally, the original site plan did not indicate paving of that strip to the right of the building, right? And so no drainage would be required. But then thereafter, the owner came in with a modification to that site plan approval, which detailed paving that area, which would then require underground drainage, right? And apparently the planning board came back and said, well, we need to see what you built. You can't just say you put in drainage. We need to physically inspect it before you go ahead and pave it over. And that wasn't done, so he was, I guess, told that he had to rip up the pavement. But, well, I'm sorry, he did insist that he had put in this underground drainage. And then he came back and kind of retracted that application for modification and said, never mind, let's go with the original site plan application. And then I guess most recently he said that he never did put in drainage. So that's problematic for me. So while he might be conforming to the original site plan application, he's certainly exhibited bad faith in asserting that there was a drainage system and then amending that and said, oh, I never put in a drainage system. So that concerns me when we're granting an alcohol, license to sell alcohol to someone who's not being straight with us. And, I think in matters of, sale of marijuana, alcohol, we need to be pretty vigilant about who we're dealing with. And so I would just urge you in your capacity as town manager to just be vigilant, and this is something we just, unfortunately, it's putting an onus on us to be just very careful in how we kind of address this owner in the future. So I'd just like to offer that.
Any other
I
questions?
appreciate that, and I agree wholeheartedly.
Mr. Chase? Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just one question to follow up. So if I understand then, what we do have now is the as-built plan that has been certified.
Correct.
And so we now know exactly what has been done. Okay.
Correct. And the town engineer and the appropriate inspectors are comfortable with that as-built. Every as-built we get, we review, and we do a site visit to assure that what's on the as-built is actually what's on the ground.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else on skips? Moving on to McElwain.
Mr. McElwain, the developers of the McElwain School, McElwain Apartments, I believe they're known as, Jason Korb and Matt Zahler talked to us last week. They're working on finalizing their funding application to the Department of Housing and Community Development for the last and large piece of their funding. Last month, the DHCD approved their pre-application, and which means that they are invited to submit the funding application in full, and that application is due February 20th. The funding decision, they anticipate to be made in early to midsummer. And then construction, certainly their process will begin immediately. Construction should begin within 6 months of that time. In terms of the property transfer, once that DHCD signs off on the funding contract, then they are free to close on the property. So I would anticipate something hopefully in early fall in terms of a closing. And we'll make sure that there's a large check.
Yeah, big check.
Literally and
Any questions
figuratively.
on that project? Thank you. Moving on to a paid parking program.
Paid parking, I did mention to the president a little earlier this evening that I can give you very basic numbers here, but I'm going to hold this item open and carry it over because I want to provide more data, as much data as we have, but the building has been struck by the illness, so we're dealing with on less than full cylinders. But I can tell you that we are looking at revenues of just under $58,000. Our total expenses, which are front-loaded to include capital investments, repayment of a capital investment from LAS Parking, is just under $30,000. So we are certainly net positive there, and we've seen a very substantial uptick as of August of this year. So obviously the university has figured it out. People that are using the parking are almost exclusively university students and staff and visitors. So that appears to be good. But I will bring as many facts and figures as I can to the next meeting. We had looked at, or had asked staff about negative feedback. We have not received any negative feedback. I'm sure if we looked on Facebook, we could find negative feedback, but we have not received any negative comments on paid parking program thus far. So that's about what I have on that one.
On the revenue side, that's strictly just from meter deposits
That is
only.
correct.
Is there a stronger location than others, or is is this driven by one particular section or
I can
location?
tell you, nope, good question. School Street is by far the strongest location.
Right.
There's very consistent turnover there, and that's where we see our strongest revenue.
So, I mean, what I'd like to see for next, on February 4th is, each location, if there's any way to break down, where the weakest part is and so forth. But I know we'll talk about this in 2 weeks, but I mean, I know there's also been concerns about the revenue and that the finance director was looking to renegotiate that contract, so I've been a little update on that, but. Yep. I mean, a year ago when we implemented this, I believe you had projected about $150,000 in revenue, so we're off. Although, according to what you told us, the revenue and expenses certainly. But I'm looking forward. The negative feedback I have, I mean, 3 businesses in the common have left, and I don't know if that's directly related to parking, but they've left, and that's a factor. And that there's not been a lot of it. I know Councilor George has brought up the enforcement part of the parking area of it as well. So if that's coming from meters, that's okay, but I wonder how much revenue is also being driven by those that don't feed the meter, that should get a regular ticket.
We can give you that.
Yeah.
I think we can give you those numbers as well. I'll get you some more information there.
Put it on for next time. Anybody else have questions regarding that? Moving on to paid, no, we just did that. Town hall status.
So on the consultant, we have secured and identified a consultant to work with to do the work that's involved in placing the town hall the National Historic Register. But we do have some work to do before the consultant can begin her work. So just in general terms, Mass Historic Commission has to evaluate, based on our request, has to evaluate the buildings for qualification to go into the National Register, and then give the town a green light to proceed with that nomination. So we are, so based on the consultant's advice, there is a good possibility that Mass Historic will want to see the nomination also encompass the entire historic district. And if that turns out to be correct, then I think the council have, that's an important decision point for the council to make. And obviously, we would come back and ask you to make that decision. But as she said, there is a good possibility, based on their recent, their recent actions, that MHC would want to see you include the entire downtown historic district. So at that point, then Bridgewater Historical Commission would request a Mass Historic Commission National Register evaluation of the building. They would likely look at the inventory form, which is a MACRIS form, which is the database for historic structures, state historic structures. They would look at that, the town hall, which is part of the state inventory. The MACRIS data there dates back to 1983, so they would likely want that updated, and additional content and additional photos provided. So before the MHC would evaluate the building. So most of that preliminary work is up to us prior to letting the consultant take over. And I've asked Jennifer and Community and Economic Development Office to get those pieces that we need to provide together this winter. So she and her team are working on that. Then clearing on the second floor. So we've actually removed all the debris and all the furniture from the second floor. We've decommissioned the electrical, the added electrical on the second floor. And based on the advice of the consultant, we're going to hold off on demolishing the walls, because that was sort of my next step, was to demo those interior walls, which are certainly not original to the building. Those are add-ons to carve up the space into offices, probably 20 years ago. So based on her advice, we're going to hold off on demoing those walls until we get the process started and we're assured that there's nothing historic about those horrible, bizarre formulations of office space. The RFP for feasibility work, well, I just added that. So the RFP for the feasibility work, the return date was Friday. I believe we have 3 submissions, and we will open those and review those submissions this week. And if you recall, that's the feasibility work that Mass Cultural Council has agreed to fund half of. So that is 3 is not great, but they appear to be from 3 reputable firms who have done this work before. So that part is good. So we'll open those this week and get reviewing those. So that's in the works. So that's what I have on that. Anybody has any questions?
Mr. George?
Thank you, Mr. President, through you to the town manager. In regards to the inclusion on the National Register of Historic Places, so the town hall is situated obviously in the center of town. We have a master plan that is looking at that, I believe. We also have an economic opportunity zone in that area. What I would really expect to see from the consultant is a list of pros and a list of cons in regards to going that route, if they're going to expand it beyond the town hall. I don't know the rules and regulations per se, so what I would hate to see is for us to go through that and have an unintended consequence in regards to being able to do some other things with downtown that I think we all agree need to be done. So that would be my expectation, probably with others as well, in regards to getting a full picture of what it is that we're doing, and again, what we're going to get out of it. More importantly, what do we have to consider that we might not be able to get out of it? Thank you.
Point well taken.
Any other questions, Mr. Columbotus?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Dutton, what do you foresee as the process for this feasibility study? What boards and commissions would be involved, and would you form a citizens committee to advise on this, or I imagine the cultural or local cultural council would have a major role in that process, but perhaps you could just quickly outline that process of undertaking this feasibility study.
Well, we did ask the consultant for, as part of the proposal, to identify a process that is inclusive of a lot of public comment, a public survey, and left it to them to really determine or advise us on what kind of, over and above that, what kind of process to use. I've been very clear that the Cultural Council will be very involved in looking at the future of that building, and certainly will be very involved in this feasibility study. So my guess is that they'll be one of the primary sort of points of contact. If, and I'm sort of projecting ahead, if the recommendation comes back that the building should be used for X and Y, then my thought is I would form a committee at that point, specific to whatever those particular uses are, and probably expand out beyond the Cultural Council to folks that have had experience, building or renovating historic structures. We've got a fair amount of expertise in town. We've done this building, and hopefully we'll be doing the memorial building. So hopefully there'll be a number of people that we can really tap to go that next step.
Right. I mean, to Mr. George's point, I think understanding the implications for community and economic development would certainly be key. I mean, while I imagine that's kind of the main focus of this, looking at the possibility of some sort of art center was to look at the ramifications for development. And I think there's somewhat evidence to show that the arts can be a major driver for that sort of thing. So presumably that will be the angle they look at.
I think that's exactly what we've asked the consultant to do, or through the RFP process. Now we just have to select the best one. And I will admit that it's a little bit of a curveball about including the entire historic district as part of a nomination. So I think this council has been very clear that we certainly don't want anything to happen to the town hall building, and so that's been our primary focus thus far, and we'll make sure that it continues to be our primary focus, but I would certainly be coming back in front of the council if the nomination process is something other than that specific building. So all points well taken.
Right, thank you.
Ms. Loesch?
Thank you. I know we started this conversation in 2017. What do you project us being done with this process?
Excuse me. So the cycle right now would give us a consultant, get us a consultant on board. I don't see that process will take any less than 6 months, that feasibility process, and we want to do it right because that report and that work will be a critical component of the next phase, the capital improvement phase, where we go to the Commonwealth Mass Cultural Council and we ask for capital money to make improvements to the building. So realistically, that puts us into 2021, and so I wouldn't foresee any physical improvements to that building probably until late calendar year 21, and more likely into 22.
And all of that has to be done before we can be on the registry.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, that would all be done, two different tracks. You know, getting it on the historic register is one track, and doing the feasibility work for cultural purpose or cultural use of that building is a different track. So two different tracks. The compilation of information and sort of the legwork we have to do on the National Register side, we'll do that over this coming winter, and then we'll look to spring to get the consultant on board. Getting things on the National Register can be time-consuming, but at least we'll have that process started. But neither are dependent upon the other.
Thank you.
Anybody else on that? Next item is plans for moving the fire station number 1.
Fire Station number 1, we've issued the feasibility study for that work. It is, right now, has a return date of February 14th. The good news is I checked with Katie today, we've had 41 firms request the RFP. And we anticipate that that feasibility work will take up to 6 months as well. And once the feasibility study is completed, we'll move on to looking at whatever proposed site is involved. And after that, we'll try to secure the site. Then we move into a schematic design phase. Then we move into a funding phase. And then if all those votes end up happening the way we anticipate, we'll get into a construction phase, and then we'll have to determine the disposition of the current building. I may have mentioned we have set up a fire station building committee. It's about a 10-member committee, pretty broad cross-section of folks. With a number of different, a lot of different experience in many different facets of what we're about to embark on. And the committee did tour Fire Station 1 several weeks ago. We're sufficiently horrified, and so I think there's quite an incentive on the part of the committee to get going on the feasibility study. So that's what I have. So February 14th is the opening date for that feasibility study.
And that feasibility study will look at various potential locations for a new station, right? That'll be part of the role of the study.
It's actually quite an attractive RFP, to tell you the truth, because what we're asking the feasibility study to do is work with the town and also work with the university to see if there are shared possibilities there with Bridgewater Fire and possibly Bridgewater State Police or joint training facilities and so forth. So it's a little bit more it's a little more unique than the average standard feasibility study for a fire station location or a fire station rebuild. But location is one of the things they'll look at. They'll recommend. Obviously, the location is based upon call data, population centers. That's the work that they do. They figure out, they sort of triangulate exactly where the most optimum location is, and then sort of work from there. So that's one of a number of things that they'll be looking at, certainly.
Okay, next item.
I'm sorry, could I just add to that? In terms of the project itself, in collaboration with the university, really the goal here is designed to find alternative sources of funding using the terminology of combined, open up some either state or federal funding. So if in fact we go down that route, the hope is that we can find some other funding sources to help pay for the facility.
Next item, ongoing traffic circulation work. Town council role.
That is, I reached out to McMahon Engineers, who is working on our traffic circulation proposals for Central Square. I didn't hear back from them today, but I do know that they've completed the road safety audit. That road safety audit has been filed with Mass DOT. And I think I've said this before, what the road safety audit does is that it establishes that there are problems associated with the locations that they've done the audit, and it sort of puts you at the head of the list when it comes time to seek funding for the proposed solution. I asked McMahon specifically to look at 3 different options, and those are the 3 options, assuming that 3 of them are feasible, that the council will see and be able to choose. So the first option is improvements to what is already there, which probably would include pedestrian, bike improvements, lane markings, and so forth. Possibly changes to signalization, but essentially it's the same traffic pattern that's there and proposed improvements. The second is what was, I think, referred to as option 3 in the 2014 Downtown Revitalization Plan, and that is essentially putting two-way traffic on the east side of Central Square, and then less impactful automobile traffic on the west side of Central Square, basically parking, less intensive traffic on that side. And then the third option would be the flip side of that, and that is putting two-way traffic on the west side of Central Square, and then putting less intensive traffic use on the east side Central Square. So they're going to come back. They're going to come to you, and that's I think one of the questions was like, what's the council's role? That would absolutely be your role, to make a decision based upon the consultant, the highway engineer's recommendations, and we can talk about a process to sort of introduce that, or get some tentative plans out so that people in the public can see them and certainly not be blindsided by any kind of sudden decision. Not that we're required to have a sudden decision. So that is that's once, and my only other comment on that, once the council decides what kind of traffic pattern it wants to pursue in Central Square, then we'll be able to get on the tip list with Old Colony, and we have now several projects which we're anticipating making the tip list. We have not been on the tip list, as far as I know, since the High Street, High and Broad traffic lights, so it's time for us to get back into that funding game, so to speak. So that's what I have on that one.
On that note, when will we get that presentation?
That's what I'd asked them today. I haven't heard back. I know they've completed. I have not seen a draft report from them, but I know that they've are close to completing it, if not completed it. I would suspect that it would be fairly soon.
What did they submit to the state? You said they submitted something.
What they submitted to the state was the road safety audit. Our crash data and acuity numbers triggered a road safety audit, both for Central Square and also for the intersection of Grove Street and Bedford. So we did, when they do a road safety audit, they bring, MassDOT brings all their engineers, and we bring, police and fire and, our staff to the site, and they do basically they just look at the signage, they look at the traffic patterns, they look at how an intersection is actually used, and then they compile a report that makes multiple recommendations on specific items that have been identified in the road safety audit as being dangerous. Areas where there's a danger. So that's
One of my concerns is the traffic flow around the common. Is that in our purview to change that if we want to, or is that a continuation on the east side of Route 27 and on the west side, a beginning of 104, so to speak? Are those our roads, so to speak, that vicinity of the common?
So the best way to answer that is that, I guess that, well, officially, the state highway ends, Route 18 ends right out here outside the Academy Building parking lot, and then it becomes all town, and then it gets picked up again way down on Broad Street. So the state, you probably see it when the state is plowing. The state will come plow, they'll turn around and then go back down 18. They don't touch Central Square. That's our purview. So you can kind of tell where the state plows is what is state highway and under their purview. In terms of how we get and who decides the traffic pattern downtown, I guess the best way to put that is it's a local decision. Executing that local decision requires buy-in from MassDOT. So it's, we want to make sure that we are including them essentially as a partner through each step of the process, both for approval purposes, but also mostly for funding purposes.
Well, it will also affect the traffic light pattern if we were to alter each lane, and that's theirs, right? Those lights are theirs, no?
No. I would like to give them all the traffic lights, but those lights are ours.
Those lights are ours.
And that's another capital issue because those lights are now antiquated, need upgrading, but that's a whole nother issue.
Any other questions about traffic? Progress of the vacant lot cleanup.
I don't have a lot on this because we haven't had a lot of progress. We've, in egregious cases, we've worked with a property owner to make improvements. It's not optimum, but that's so far the most effective, really the most effective thing we can do. I know there were issues with graffiti on a building on Broad Street, and I talked to the property owner, and he had promised to take care of that. And quite honestly, I haven't gone back to check to see if he has. And then in terms of some of the fields and the overgrown brush that we had asked him to take care of, he also arguably took care of some of that. But we have a vacant and abandoned building bylaw ordinance, and it's not. I guess I'll say it's challenging for us to enforce that because for a number of reasons, but mostly because of manpower. And I've struggled to figure out a way, short of reaching out to property owners directly and asking them, but I've struggled with a way to provide some kind of stick. And I've yet to come up with something that is streamlined and efficient that we can effectively apply across the board. But certainly welcome any suggestions along those lines.
Can I,
Go ahead, Mr. George.
through you to the town manager, I'm a little confused in regards to the stick comment. So is it, we don't have the manpower to enforce a vacant building or lot ordinance, or is the ordinance such that it's not enforceable? I'm a little confused on that.
I don't think, I think with enough manpower, we'd be able to do something with the ordinance, but I'm trying to figure out if there are changes we can make to the ordinance that would make it a little less cumbersome for us to enforce. I guess the best way to put it.
Okay.
So
So I guess where I'm still, I'm going to say confused for the lack of a better term, is we've been talking about a particular vacant lot. We've been talking about safety issues potentially with the buildings on the lot. We've seen those buildings sit there for, decades. I was really under the impression that we would be able to move forward on something in regards to compelling the business owner after an inspection to make necessary changes to the buildings on the property if there were safety issues. I'm I'm little perplexed now that it just seems like we're sitting here again and we have no recourse on abandoned properties, and that's my opinion, in the center of town. Where do we go? I mean, I gotta say, Mr. Dutton, a month ago, maybe if not longer, we talked about proactively going in, doing a safety inspection to at least make sure that the buildings were not a safety issue to the public. They're in the center of town. People walk by that all the time. And now I'm getting the impression that there's nothing we can do. And if I'm wrong, please tell me I'm wrong.
No, I don't want to say there's nothing we can do by any means, but the threshold, it's a high threshold for doing, calling a board of engineers and going onto a property uninvited. If the building is secure, there's little that our building inspector can do to gain entry. So if it's the four sides are secure, short of I'm thinking of like a roof that's caving in and obvious from the street, it's hard for him to gain entry to look at other factors. So we know the utilities have been turned off. We know that the buildings are secure. So it's a challenge in that case to try to generate a reason for that board of engineers to be called to do an assessment of that property.
So short of an obvious safety issue, God forbid something were to collapse, we have no recourse other than to sit and wait to have our building inspector go into that building and at least do a visual inspection to make sure that there aren't any safety issues. Is that what you're saying?
Building inspector doesn't have a right of entry. So unless it's an obvious danger to the public, in which case he has to go through a process, and that's what the Board of Engineers is. It's the process that whereby he takes all the town engineer and the relevant building inspectors, does a site visit and establishes that there's an immediate danger, public safety danger, and then can order it torn down, order it secured, or what the case may be. But he himself doesn't have that right of entry that unless there's a permit pulled, unless he's invited, or unless he can establish through the Board of Engineers that there's an obvious safety danger. So it's, we have to walk through those. I mean, the police likewise actually don't have a right of entry. And when you boil it down, one of the few town officials that actually does have a right of entry is the health agent, because that, health issues sort of trump pretty much everything, but the others don't have that.
What would it take for the health agent to go in and do an inspection?
He has to receive a complaint. And if he receives a complaint, he can do, believe he can do an inspection and have that right of entry.
Okay, that's good. And just one follow-up question. For the owner of the vacant lots, has the planning board received any application?
Actually, the planning board has received an application.
Okay.
Yes.
Step in the right direction.
Any
Thank
other
you.
questions on the vacant lot, Mr. Columbotus?
I'm a little confused. I'm looking at the administrative code and section 5 of this vacant and abandoned properties title. Section 5 is inspections, and it reads, pursuant to the state building code, the commissioner or his or her designee shall have the authority and the duty to inspect properties subject to this ordinance for compliance with the ordinance and to issue citations for any violation. So is there something in the state building code that prevents us from exercising this right to inspection, or just?
I'll have to take a look.
I suggest we all take a look at this for, It seems like we do have the authority, but I don't know if we're overstepping in our claim to authority here.
Yeah, I mean, to follow up, I'm not looking, I don't think it's an egregious move of a building that's been vacant for 20-plus years. Utilities are turned off, no water. I mean, if we're prohibited because there isn't an imminent danger, I think that's kind of foolish in that respect. I mean, we're not looking at a building that's been vacant for a few years.
Well, I think what you're alluding to is the section on the abandoned properties, right? The registration process.
Right.
So there's a process by which I think that section 5
Yeah.
is applicable
It's
to.
triggered, right.
Right. So I think there are steps before you get to that section 5, but I think once those steps have been addressed in the fashion that the ordinance says, then I think section 5 becomes applicable.
Right. I mean, this section on vacant and abandoned properties required registration.
Right.
Then,
There's a
I'm not sure if
process.
we've invoked that authority.
Well, I know myself or the town manager don't have authority over that under the ordinance itself.
I mean, I think there's something, although it's vacant, it's not necessarily abandoned because it's on the tax roll for the town, and I believe they're not.
It's actually both. With the ordinance covers both vacant and abandoned properties, and then there's a definition section.
Right, but I believe that the properties are not, they're paying their taxes on the property. I don't think that's in delinquents.
So they're not abandoned, but they are vacant.
They're
So
vacant.
Right.
they're
they're
subject,
vacant.
if a property is either vacant or abandoned,
Because
then they're subject to this.
about a month ago, I got a little tag on my door from the assessor's office that they want to come in and inspect the inside of my house. I wasn't home and I haven't replied to them again. I would think that the assessors would have a right to get in there if they're doing their annual assessment of the properties. If they want to get in, they can get in, I assume. And what if they saw inside one of the buildings that, it was
Well,
ready to
there's a
crash, wouldn't they?
protocol under that ordinance. So Councilor Columbotus is absolutely right. Section 5 talks about an inspection. The inspection can come under the ordinance that we have adopted, but the protocol has to be followed first to give the authority to go in and then inspect the things that are supposed to be followed under that protocol. So I think you have to get
Well, there's a,
step 1 through 4.
that's a
and-
separate inspection I'm talking about the regular assessment of the value of the property.
Well, that's a
done.
different, yeah. I
Sure
think
it
that's
is,
a
but if
different
they
matter.
saw something, if they were in there and they saw something, they should say something to the officials in the town. To say,
Absolutely.
Are they obligated to?
Well, I mean, you're talking about the people that are just going around doing their assessments. I mean,
I'm not going to rely
for
on them.
for tax sake, they're
Yeah.
they're not going to be looking for
Right.
that, right? That's not their job. That's not their role. So I don't think that you're likely to find someone reporting it based on that. I think you're more likely to find it someone reporting it based on what they just observed.
Anything else? Items for the next meeting? Just we'll put the paid parking back on there for my detailed report. Anybody has anything to let Ian know tonight, or you have until before the agenda comes out on February 4th meeting?
I'd like to
let
have
know?
the signs, the stop signs out here. We talked about putting lights on those several months ago. Safety Committee had agreed to looking into it.
Stop
These-
signs?
The signs, the stop signs out here, they had talked about putting the lights around them, like we've seen in other locations. Hopefully, some people will see it that way.
I should add too that I just met with the town manager to discuss that. I think the resolve that we had was to put one LED solar-powered stop sign in the South Street Central Square location, as determined that it was the most confusing as you approach it due to an abundance of signage. It's actually quite confusing about what to do. So I just met with them on Friday, and there is a process that I believe we came to agreements and that will move forward to try to fund that.
Anything else? But moving on to discussion items. The first item on here is, I put forward is the Charter Review Committee. The charter currently says that every 6 years, there should be a Charter Review Committee to review the charter. So I put this on for discussion just to make sure that my math is correct, is that in 2014, the first Charter Review Committee was put together by, I believe, Councilor Fitzgibbons was president at that time, and he put the committee together. They were charged with a year to review the charter, make recommendations to the council, which was done. And, it went to committee and was revised and changed, and we had a lot of discussions. It went to the state, stayed up there for a while, and then we finally voted on it. So if I'm reading the charter correctly, the 6 years started in 2014, not when the town voted down all the changes. So at the next meeting, I'll be, in my announcements, I'll be asking for people to step forward to serve on a Charter Review Committee once again. Any questions regarding that? And I'll pretty much follow the same lead or the same way that Councilor Fitzgibbons handled it 6 years ago. I think our first meeting was in April 2014. District 6 vacancy appointment voting procedures is put on by Councilor Columbotus. My intention is that I believe we have 2 letters of interest right now, is to have both of them or anyone else that puts their name forward in the next week at our February 4th meeting. We'll let them speak, we'll ask them questions, and at the end of that, we can make a decision to vote one of them in. It's been suggested to me that perhaps we actually have an election amongst us. So we could call the town clerk up here to give us a ballot, and we vote for either one of the people on the paper ballot. 78 of us, if we're all here. That's the plan.
Okay, my concern was last time we had a vacancy that we voted on, we had, I think, at least two.
Last time we had a vacancy, Mr. Chase got appointed.
I was the only.
Okay, so prior to that, when
So-
Mr. Rivers
Yes,
Yeah, that
resigned,
was the only other time.
and we had, I don't know if we had 2 or 3 people,
We had 3.
we had 3.
but no one candidate got a plurality. Plurality is 5?
Majority.
A majority of, no one candidate got 5 votes from the council, so we decided not to appoint any.
Correct.
And I'm wondering, so we have that right not to choose to fill the vacancy, apparently. So I'm just wondering how we're going to, will a simple majority, suppose one candidate, if we have 2 candidates now, if one gets 4 and the other gets 3 votes, are we gonna-
No, my view is if the town clerk comes in and runs an election, and we all get a piece of paper with the 2 names or more on there, if one person gets 1 vote, and all the other ballots are blank, that person with the 1 vote wins.
Okay, so that's
how I
different
look
than
at
we
it.
did it the last time, so
It's totally different.
yeah, okay.
Because we never did it that way.
Right.
But the last time was Fred Chase. You're talking
Right.
about the
Time
time
prior.
before that, and that was an at-large opening where there was some concerns that we didn't need to fill it because each district was still represented, even though, the at-large wasn't filled. I gave a vote for each person, actually, but it was all voted down.
Right.
So it was still in the infancy stages of how to handle a vacancy every time we have one. I'm simply following the same procedure that we followed for when Councilor Chase took over for Councilor Perry. I'm simply following now because it's a district one. So I think that, with the exception of a ballot, but he was the only one.
Right.
We voted, and it was one person voted against the appointment simply because it was an election in 2 months, and I think you only had 2 meetings, and then you were elected, and you were the only one on the ballot, so forth. So, Counselor?
And to be clear, this person's going to serve about 5 meetings?
yes, yeah, probably about 5 or 6, yeah.
And there's going to be an election for the role, and they would probably roll off if they don't get on the ballot.
Well, I believe that both the candidates that put their names in have pulled papers to run. Whether they're on the ballot or not, that still remains to be seen. They still have to get the signatures, and they still have to get certified.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, that's a discussion that we can have once we get to the point of after the interviews. I think we need to appoint someone, and I am ready to do that based on their interviews on February 4th. Mr. Rush?
Are you aware of the two people who have applied?
I've seen their names, and I've seen the names on the website because they've both pulled papers to run.
Okay.
for the-
I have not seen the names. However, I think I'd want to address prior to any type of vote, if in fact, just some guidance, if Bill Wood applies for his seat, do we have an opinion from the town attorney as to what we should do in terms of break in service? And I don't want to be dealing with that headache. I don't want to, as a council, if in fact Bill Wood would be elected or elected back to his seat, then be dealing with some type of legal challenge or issue. And so for those that are more in tune with the town charter, I'd like to know that ahead of time. I know there's some councilors that have some reservations if in fact that's what plays out on the 4th.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to address that, obviously, look into it and address it. I think what we're going to find is that the charter is very vague and may not explicitly cover that in a sense that will be black and white. And I think you could do the best you could, and you may face a challenge either way, right?
Okay.
So that's going to be based probably on just the plain language as we see the charter, but I'm happy to look into it explicitly and address it, certainly. We can do that at the next meeting or whenever you all want. Obviously, that election isn't for a little bit of time.
Mhm.
I don't think he can be prevented from pulling papers.
Sure, certainly.
Obviously. But then, we run into, what does this mean if that person is elected and, can they actually serve under our charter, right? But I have loosely looked into it, and it's very vague.
Okay.
So you're not going to find a black or white answer there.
But for the purposes of February 4th, if the person that resigned submits their name for the appointment,
Right.
you would
Right.
look. You
So
would,
now what is the real?
the election's separate. The election is really
Right.
up to the town clerk. She runs that.
And,
So
that-
it's
and
just not
let me
up
just
to us.
clarify, that is my concern. My concern is having some sort of advice for the council
So
if
you
that
talking?
scenario.
So are you talking for re-election at the actual election, or are you talking about for
Appointment.
an appointment from you all?
Filled vacancy.
So I think that becomes a little clearer, right? Because then I think you're talking about this break in time. But again, you may run into some vague issues, and I think you all, under the charter, have a lot more leeway in how you do that part of this process than obviously the general electorate at a point where someone pulls papers and runs for election. So I think maybe that leeway gives you the ability to kind of formulate those rules a bit, right? But I think you could still make the argument one way or the other that this is a break in time, right? A break in
Because that is
service.
not defined.
What's
Break-
that?
Break in time is not defined.
I don't have the exact, I'm not looking at the language right in front of me. We can obviously look at it and talk to you a little bit about it, but I think it's something like consecutive days or consecutive amount of years without a break, uninterrupted time, right? So now you're defining what is interrupted and right? So I think as it relates to this next part of it, I think there are enough things in place that give you all some leeway about how you do that, which is why you saw different results the time Mr. Chase came forward, and then the time before that, if you recall, the process was a little bit different. I think that part, because it is vague in the charter, you guys have done differently a little bit. But I think, the general election part of it's a whole different story. So I think you have some
Mr.
flexibility.
Fitzgibbons?
I think we're just worrying about something that may or may not happen.
Right.
If something comes up on February 4th, we can turn to the attorney then. If nothing comes up, then why worry about hypotheticals? What if, somebody from out of town says they're going to move in by the date, et cetera, so.
My only other concern, and obviously we can address this in the future as well, is the paper ballot notion. I hadn't heard that, so it might be something we should look into, because this is a meeting, it is an open meeting. You are contemplating things and you're taking a vote on something. So this is not a general election. This is a vote on a very specific thing. So I'm not sure about that. That might be something. I have never done any research on that. I've never seen that come up. We've never had it as a council come up. I can't recall a single time. I've been with the town maybe 9 years that something's been done by a paper vote as opposed to an actual vote in public meeting. So that might be something to look into.
The old form of government was, I think, referred to as the Australian ballot at town meetings.
Right.
We did that as well.
A little different, right. Right, so we just haven't had that here yet.
No.
Yep, so I just wanted to, I don't know the answer to that, but just, this is the first I'm
I mean,
hearing of it.
I'm comfortable enough, having my voice heard, but
Yeah.
it was brought to my attention that may be a good alternative.
Yeah,
doesn't-
and if we
doesn't
can do
have to
it, by
be.
all means, you guys do it however you want. I just want to make sure with the open meeting, that's not an issue.
Anything else? Did you have any questions about this, Mr.
No, well,
Pelosi?
so let me just clarify, it's your intention that we appoint somebody,
Yes, I'd like
but
to.
we could decide that we don't want to appoint anybody, contrary to your wish. How's that going to happen? Are we going to take a vote as to whether we're going to appoint anybody?
I think if there's
and then decide
say-
on who that anybody
like,
is?
Not to get into hypotheticals, but if there's a motion to appoint X and there's a second, we take a vote.
Sure.
And if that person gets one vote, they're in.
Okay. I think it's important to talk about these things so you can be prepared, and that's the benefit of talking about hypothetical.
Sorry, when you say one vote, if we're voting, if someone makes a motion and there's a second, one vote is not going to pass that motion, correct? It would.
I don't know. We're electing, aren't we? We're electing somebody. That's what we're doing. We're holding an election, actually. It's a little different.
It's not a measure.
I will defer to the
little
law
different
when
than
we
a-
get to the
than a-
law instead of what is being
Yeah, I think we have
hypothesized.
to, I
I
think,
think this is what I'm asking about.
Yeah.
If we get this clarified before the 4th.
yeah, that's a really good question. I think, we do need to fine tune that a little bit.
Yeah.
So that the process is, one, we make sure it's in compliance with the open meeting law. And two, it is unique in that I'm not sure it's an election or if it's an appointment, right?
Right.
I don't know that I call that an election.
The term election is in the charter. We shall hold an election, council.
Council election.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's going to be something we're going to have to verify, and we want to make sure we do that right.
So I'd ask the town attorney to have
Yeah.
a one-page memo for us on what the procedure ought to be in accordance with open meeting law.
It'd be nice to know going
Town
into
charter and
February.
the town
It would be nice
bylaws.
to know going into February 4th whether we can do a ballot vote or not. And number two is if it's a motion and a second, does that require a majority?
Right.
Like a simple, like another,
Or is it more akin to an order or ordinance or whatever? Yeah, I understand.
thank you.
Yes.
Would it make sense now to decide on what we would prefer that process to be? In other words, ballot, would open meeting vote, so that that process is laid out for us prior to the 4th, what our wishes would
Well,
be?
he's got to look in to see what we can and cannot do. And we, like I said, 2 names have been submitted to our council clerk. Anything can happen in 2 weeks. They both could decide the heck with it, and then nobody shows up. So I
I
think
guess I'm only saying, I don't think it's a heavy lift to say, that in fact, if he comes back and says we could use a ballot option, that process is laid out for us so we could get it done on the 4th. Rather than asking him, okay, well, how do we do that? And then we have to wait another 2 weeks to figure out how to do a ballot
Right.
vote.
I think what I'll try to do is get you something memo-wise about this is what I advise you should use for a procedure.
Thank you.
And keeping in mind what you all have expressed is your hopes of doing it and what you think the process should look like, and then I'll put together kind of a procedure. I think that's the easiest way to do it. And then you guys can just follow a procedure that I put together.
Thank you.
Okay, well, sure we'll see that again. Plan for memorial building renovations.
Yeah, I was just, there's been some concern about the nature of the planned renovations for the memorial building. I guess because of, we're hoping to put the offices of DPW and the water and sewer in the new DPW building, or at the water treatment plant, but unable to do that, and so now there's a need to house those departments in Memorial Building, which basically would take up that whole main space of the Memorial Building for those offices and preclude any other historical or cultural or memorial use of that building, as I think has been the assumption all along. So I'm wondering if that's unavoidable, that we lose those spaces to offices, administrative offices, or is there any way we can salvage some sort of historical or memorial use as the building was originally intended?
I think, to answer that question, I think one of the things we asked the architect to go back and do was try to make some changes to the plan that he had come up with that sort of tries to incorporate some display space, some features that will really highlight the building's interior. The exterior is really not a non-issue because it is what it is. It needs some help, but it is what it is. So on the interior, he's come back and tried to provide, I haven't honestly looked at the plans yet, they just came back today. But he's tried to provide some areas where we can have the historic displays, and he's also tried to incorporate. No matter what we do, we have to put bathrooms in. So he's tried to incorporate bathrooms less obtrusively, I guess would be the best way to put it, than he was proposing the first go around. But in fairness, the first go around, he was trying to accommodate bathrooms in a way. One of the Secretary of the Interior standards, which we all talk about, is if you're going to do a historic renovation and you're going to add things, try to add them so that they're easily reversed or easily removed. They may never be removed, but do it in such a way that's sensitive to the existing structure and the existing elements that have historic relevance. So in the name of that, he proposed essentially a box more in the middle of the structure, so that there were he wasn't touching the interior walls. He was just creating sort of a two-bathroom box in the center. So understandably, there was some concern about that. So we asked him instead to try to accommodate bathrooms, on the edge. We do have to, as far as I can recollect, we have to provide one handicapped accessible bathroom on the first level in addition to another bathroom, but only one of them has to be accessible, built to the size standards of accessibility. The other can be somewhat smaller. So that was his charge. We asked him to go do that, and honestly, I haven't had a chance to look at those, but I know that was the sensitivity that we asked him to address.
So how many people would be working in that building?
We would have 6 people. 10 right now, 6 people.
And that triggers a need for 2 bathrooms? Why can't we have just one accessible?
Don't pretend to know the code. but I know we can get away with one on the lower level for the intended use, but we have to do two on the upper level.
So is there, how is this all being, is there a building committee working on this, or is it staff exclusively, or?
So far, we've used staff because of the intended use. The outside, it's fairly, the building is the building. There's not a whole lot we can do on the inside or the outside, for that matter. But we know we have to accommodate, bathrooms, which is the biggest issue. And we know we have to provide handicapped access basically in the front of the building, which is the biggest exterior issue. So what he's done, and once we begin to finalize this, I'll come to the council and I'll show you exactly what the plan is. But so we've we asked members of the Disabilities Commission to come in and take a look. We've asked members of the Historic District Commission to come in and take a look. We've had Historic Commission members come in and take a look. What am I missing?
You've given something to the CDC and they've come back.
Pardon?
You've given something to the CDC.
Yes.
And they've come back with their amendment as well.
Yeah. So we've instead of creating a building committee, because it just didn't seem like there were enough decision points to justify a committee. But we've tried to draw in individuals from the committees as we can to take a look at the plan. So, and we will do the same thing now that we've got some revised plans. We'll do the same thing and draw them in. And it may be more appropriate at this point, since it's becoming closer to reality, to actually go to the committees, the full committees. So we didn't want to go to Historic District Committee because as a formal committee, because at a formal meeting, because they have a role to play in approving the project. We didn't want to put them in that awkward situation, but we can certainly go to the other committees, I think, at this point.
Thank you. Any questions on that issue? Moving on to committee reports. Are there any committees that wish to report on their activities? Ms. Loesch?
The Strategic Planning Committee has done its role in the process for the town manager review. We have compiled everything. It's being tallied by council clerk. We'll have an executive summary, which we'll share with you, that you can share with Mr. Dutton. When it comes to goals, we reviewed what we had for 2019, saw what was missing, what wasn't done. We've incorporated some things that we're going to like to see as the year goes forward. We'll have those kind of written up and presented, if not for the 4th and the 2nd meeting in February, because our goal was to have those done by the end of February.
Any other committee reports? Ms. Susan?
At our last meeting, the ordinance to change the farming ordinance went to the committee. I'd like to hear a report from that committee. I know they had a meeting and they addressed it.
The
farming ordinance.
chair just left the meeting, but I was in the meeting, so I can add something if you'd like. I don't have the minutes in front of me. We talked about a number of things that were very exciting. In regards to the farm ordinance, I had made a motion not to recommend to the council, but that hasn't come out of committee yet. So once it does, you'll hear all about it.
Okay. Anything else? Moving on to legislation for action, Order FY 20038, contract ratification, AFSCME. At their meeting held December 17th, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. On January 13th, the Finance Committee voted 5-0 to recommend approval. This measure may be finally considered this evening and does require a roll call vote. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second. Any discussion? Mr. Fitzgibbons?
Just on all of these to the town manager so we can move through them relatively quickly, but we've come in with a shared revenue model with all of our unions, et cetera, and we've been very transparent in what we can afford. Have all of these contract ratifications and the transfer amounts that we knew we were going to have to pay because we were out of contract in certain situations, have they all come in within that revenue model?
They have, correct.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
It's not here.
Oh, sorry. Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
6 in favor, none against. Sorry, 7 in favor, none against.
Order FY 20039, contract ratification, library. At their meeting held December 17th, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. On January 13th, the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend approval. This measure may be finally considered this evening.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Order FY 20040, transfer order funding AFSCME contractual settlement. At their meeting held December 17, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. On January 13th, the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend approval. This
Motion to
measure may
approve.
be finally considered this evening.
Sorry, motion to approve?
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second to approve. Any discussion?
The numbers add up, correct?
Correct.
Numbers add up. Any further discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Order FY 20041, transfer order funding of library contractual settlement. At the meeting held on December 17, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. On January 13th, the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend approval. This measure may be finally considered this evening.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch. Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Order FY 20042, transfer order funding of non-union employees. At their meeting held on December 17, 2019, the Budget and Finance Committee voted 3-0 to recommend approval. On January 13th, Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend approval. This measure may be finally considered this evening.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion, there's a second for approval. Any discussion? Seeing none, this does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Order FY 20044, acceptance of non-recurring revenue to capital. On January 13th, 2020, the Finance Committee voted 6-0 to recommend approval. The Budget and Finance Committee met January 21st and will provide their disposition to the full council. This measure may be finally considered this evening pending the disposition of the Budget and Finance Committee. The Budget and Finance Committee voted 2-0 this evening to approve this. So this measure may be finally considered this evening. I'll entertain a motion.
So
Motion
moved.
approved.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second. Any discussion? This does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against.
Petition 2020003, presidential primary warrant, which is in your packet. It's March 3rd, I believe. I'll entertain a motion to approve the warrant.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and there's a second to approve the warrant. Any discussion?
No.
Seeing none, that does require a roll call vote.
Mr. Souza.
Yes.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. George.
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher.
Yes.
Mr. Rushton.
Yes.
Mrs. Loesch.
Yes.
Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
Mr. Fitzgibbons.
Yes.
8 in favor, none against. And if you could just sign the warrant, please.
Is it in my package?
It's in everybody.
I got the original, okay. I'll get to that. Okay, resolution FY 20005, FY 21 budget resolution. This one is going to be postponed We met this evening, and there's some amendments that we're still going through, so you'll probably see this back here February 4th with everything else. Resolution FY 20-007 amends September 2020 council meeting date.
Motion to approve?
Second.
There's a motion to approve. No, we're changing the presidential, the primary date in September to September 1st, right?
Oh, September
September
8th.
8th.
To September 8th,
Yeah, going from the 1st to the 8th.
to the 8th. The state primary be September 8th. Okay, there's a motion, there's a second. Any discussion on that? This requires a voice vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Old business, there is none. New business is ordinance FY 20-007, zoning ordinance adoption of the codification zoning ordinances. This was referred to the planning board for public hearing. It can also be referred to the CEDC for consideration. Not a public hearing, and then the council will hold a public hearing. So I'll entertain a motion to refer this to planning board and the community economic development.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second to do that. Any discussion on that?
Mr. President,
Mr.
just to be clear, we're referring it to the planning board for hearing,
Yes,
the Community Economic Development Committee for consideration,
yes.
report back to this council,
And then we have to hold a
and
hearing.
then we will hold a hearing.
Exactly. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So I'll ask the council clerk to schedule a hearing as soon as we have a disposition from the planning board. Citizens' comments. Are there any citizens here that wish to speak during the citizens' comments portion of our meeting? Any citizens at all? Seeing none, council comments. I'll start with Mr. Fitzgibbons.
None tonight, thank you.
I'm trying to find that thing I got to sign. Mr. Columbotus?
Nothing.
Ms. Loesch?
I just want to say I started volunteering and participating in town things when my son was 6 months old. I took him to the university for the downtown revitalization study. Today is his 6th birthday. So just wanted to remind us that time does move quickly, because I have a 6-year-old, but government should try to move a little bit quicker. So we should hold ourselves accountable for what we said we're going to do as a council and ensure those things get done. So happy birthday to my son Carter.
Mr. Rushton? Mr. George?
Just a couple quick things. We had a retirement from the fire department. Myself and Councilor Rushton were there. It is really nice to be able to participate in things like that. We do a lot of, I'll call it mundane work per se, but it was very good to see someone have a long, prosperous career and be able to celebrate with him. So I look forward to doing a lot more of that on a go-forward basis. And I'm just going to point out that we approved an acceptance of a non-recurring revenue to capital, which is our, I believe it's our prison mitigation. I would really love to have a robust conversation on how many times in a row we get revenue and we stop calling it one-time revenue to be able to include that within our budget. Thank you.
Mr. Chase?
No comment.
Mr. Souza?
Last meeting, sitting here, we talked about people going through these stop signs. Last meeting, I left the parking lot, headed to the common, and there's 2 cars parked in front of me at the stop sign. I said, wow, they stopped at the stop sign. The first one pulls out, and the second one, about 5 feet behind him, followed right on through. But that's only the good side of it. He continues up the common. I go through the green light, so I go through the sign after I stopped, heading to the light. The light is red. He slows down and then speeds up right through the red light. And I said, I guess he really didn't improve, did it? So, That's my comment.
There you go. All right, very good.
My comment.
I have no comments this evening. We do not have an executive session this evening.
I move to adjourn.
To adjourn, there's a second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned. See you February 4th. Or before.